appropriate ending topic. It's 100 years since the publication of Shane's biography of Shackleton, and Michael wrote many years ago a beautiful book called Rejoice by Heart, where he looked into the correspondence between Mill and Shackleton and Emily about the genesis of the writing of the biography. So it's fantastic to have this opportunity, 100 years to the year, to talk about it. Micheal Rosove.
Slowly and enunciate as carefully as possible. And I hope that my West Coast American accent with a touch of Canadian will not be a problem for me. This year is the centenary of the first biography of Sir Ernest Shackleton, written by Hugh Robert Mill in close collaboration with Sir Ernest's widow, Emily. I am indebted to Seamus for inviting me to speak at this 24th annual Shackleton Autumn School on the subject of that 1923 publication. It didn't take much for Seamus to persuade Rena Lee and me to abandon sunny Santa Monica, California for a cold, dreary economic. But indeed, our planning to come has been a pleasant anticipation over the last few months. I attended this school 14 years ago and only wish it were an easy matter to come every year. The lineup of speakers, the activities, along with the articles in Nimrod are a perpetual draw to an outstanding program year after year. And I say hats off to Seamus, his father Frank, who founded the school, their families, and the staff of the entire Before getting into the main subject matter, I think most here have a sense of my Antarctic credentials, but I have at least a minor Shackleton credential, and that is, this is a photograph of me boarding a ship in Possession Bay at South Georgia after a failed attempt with Adventure Network International to cross the interior of South Georgia in the footsteps of Sir Ernest. We were under the leadership of Dave Hahn, who was a Rainier mountaineer who had summited Everest 4 times and was a member of the Mallory Research Expedition. We had a chance to enjoy Peggotty, where McCarthy, McNeish, and Vincent were left behind when Shackleton, Worsley, and Green started their trek at 2 o'clock in the morning on May 19th. And we succeeded in getting underneath the trident, that famous spot over which Shackleton famously said, "It's a double of a risk, we'll slide." We got to that point, and overnight we had quite a storm. Temperature dropped to about -15 Celsius, 2 feet, I guess that would be about 70 centimeters of new drift, and it left avalanche conditions on the other side of the trident. And after Dave Hahn assessed the circumstances, he said, "We can't go on." So we had to backtrack and went out via Possession Bay and simply said, "We tried." Now keep in mind, that was in the middle of November, the height of the weather and the season for South Georgia. But Sir Ernest had to do this in the middle of May with 13 hours of complete darkness and a little bit of twilight on each side. He was blessed, however, by clear skies, and there happened to be a full moon on May 17th, 2 days before the 3 of them departed. And Shackleton commented about the moonlight that illuminated their pathway as they made the attempt to cross, which they had to do very quickly. Our party of 12 had the finest modern equipment, and Shackleton had screws in his boots. So it was a very different set of circumstances. But that's my closest connection to the Shackleton history. In the darkening twilight, I saw a lone star hover gem-like above the bay. So wrote Sir Ernest Shackleton his last diary entry on January 4th, 1922, on board Quest, anchored in Grytviken Harbor. He and his party had just arrived at South Georgia after a difficult voyage. Sir Ernest was ecstatic, knowing the real southward adventure was about to begin. Scout James Marr described the boss, quote, sniffing the air like a war horse scenting a far-off battle, close quote. Sir Ernest relished the greetings of his friends among the whaling station personnel. However, matters quickly changed. Frank Weil, second in command, was awakened by the physicians Alexander Macklin and James McElroy at 3 o'clock in the morning on the 5th. We want to wake you up thoroughly, they said, for we have some bad news to give you, the worst possible. Shackleton was only 47 years old. Upon the news arriving back in England, Lady Shackleton, whom I'll refer to as Emily, instructed that Sir Ernest's remains that had already arrived in Montevideo en route home be returned for burial in the Whalers Cemetery at Grytviken. South Georgia was dear to the boss's heart. It was the land he last trod, and it was the scene of his greatest exploit. And now, it is so fitting that in 2011, the preserved ashes of Frank Wild, Sir Ernest's trusted companion on 4 Antarctic expeditions and the Elephant Island hero of the Endurance expedition, have been interred beside his revered boss. Emily was soon approached by would-be biographers, but she was intent on Dr. Hugh Robert Mill, the greatest living Antarctic historian with whom Sir Ernest shared a deep mutual respect. The relationship between all three had dated back to August 1901, when Ernest was third officer aboard the Discovery on Scott's first expedition, and Mill was aboard as far as Madeira to instruct staff, including Ernest, on oceanographic and meteorological data gathering. They met as they boarded and were about to sail. For Mill, quote, Shackleton was, I found, a lover of poetry, and we used to pass much time in capping favorite quotations. He was the most attractive and many-sided man I ever knew, close quote. How wonderful it would be if we here today could have been on the Discovery eavesdropping on those conversations and poetry recitations. Both Ernest, who became Sir Ernest in 1909 after his Nimrod expedition, and Emily independently remained in frequent contact with Mill. So it was quite natural that Emily would approach him over the matter of a biography mere weeks after the boss's burial. Emily's choice of the William Hyman and firm as publisher was natural, as it had produced Sir Ernest's The Heart of the Antarctic and South, as well as Douglas Mawson's The Home of the Blizzard. And so, on April 18, 1922, Emily wrote a lengthy letter from her home in Eastbourne, where she was raising her 3 children. This photograph of the family probably dates from around 1916 or thereabouts. Emily was living in Eastbourne with her children, Raymond, Cecily, and Edward. At the time of Sir Ernest's death, they would have been about 17, 16, and 8 years old. And she wrote to Mill, who lived 70 kilometers away in Dorman's Park, Surrey, near London. Consider for a moment that there was no Scott biography until 1929, 16 years after news of the demise of Scott's Polar Party reached England, although there was no shortage of qualified authors who could have produced an excellent one. Emily wrote, "My dear Dr. Mill, when I was in London last week, I saw Mr. Pauling of Heinemann, and we spoke of a biography being written within the next year. He was very kindly interested and would like to publish it. He entirely agreed with me that I should ask you before anyone else if you would consider the question of compiling it. Please forgive me if I am asking too much. I feel that no one could do it as you could, if you would. We must recount for a moment the kind of giant Hugh Robert Mill was, given his own tendency to understatement. He excelled as an undergraduate at the University of Edinburgh, winning numerous prizes, received his Doctor of Science in Inorganic Chemistry, came into contact with prominent scientists of the day, including those of the renowned oceanographical Challenger voyages, was involved in the production of its reports, became a member of the Council of the Royal Scottish Geographical Society, and all this before the age of 30. He became engaged as well with the Royal Geographical Society of London, befriended its head librarian J. Scott Kelty on the left, and succeeded him in the same post. As librarian, with Kelty now secretary, they organized the 6th International Geographical Congress held in London in 1895, a meeting 4 years in the making, sponsored by the RGS and its president, Sir Clements Markham, on the right. These are two formidable-looking guys. That convocation effectively launched what became Scott's expedition 1901 to 1904, as well as the entire heroic period of Antarctic exploration. Mill later became director of the British Rainfall Organization that gathered meteorological data from stations all around the country. And in his spare time, I don't know how he had in his spare time, he authored The Siege of the South Pole, published in 1905, unquestionably a classic in the Antarctic literature. He became acquainted with virtually every Antarctic expedition leader and many of the officers and scientific staffs of the period, always extending his graciousness and generosity. Historian T.H. Bachman called Mill friend to heroes. I call him the finest Antarctican who never went there. Mill married in 1889. His 40-year marriage ended with his wife's death in 1929. By that time, he was progressively incapacitated by failing eyesight. He died in 1950, just shy of 89, and just before his Hugh Robert Mill and autobiography was published, with its 28-page chapter called The Attraction of the Poles, recounting his interactions with innumerable polar people. That book, The Siege of the South Pole, his centenary volume, The Record of the Royal Geographical Society, 1830 to 1930, and his monumental biography, The Life of Sir Ernest Shackleton, stand indelibly in the polar literature. And a few words about Emily. Ernest met Miss Emily Dorman in 1897. She was close friends with his sister Ethel. Mill described their meeting, quote, "If they did not fall in love at first sight when their eyes met, they became instantaneously such true friends that the world was changed," close quote. Emily opened up to him the world of Robert Browning's poetry, and Prospus became, as she put it, their watchword, a poem that could not have reflected Sir Ernest's character better. This is the poem projected here. If you're not familiar with it, I do suggest that you Google Robert Browning Prospus and read this poem. The strength of it is simply stunning, and I think you'll agree with me that no poem could describe Sir Ernest as well as this one does. 1922 were so efficient that Mill was able to reply to Emily's letter inviting him to write the biography on the very same April 18th with his immediate decision. Quote, "My dear Lady Shackleton," he wrote, "your letter has made a very strong appeal to me. I should be overjoyed if I could only help in producing such a life of Ernest as his memory deserves." Close quote. He then elaborated on what would be his approach, seeking facts and rendering objective opinions. On April 19th, Emily replied while apologizing for the smudges in her letter. You can see her apology at the very top there. Quote, "My dear Dr. Mill, your kind letter rejoiced my heart." There was, however, a brief, annoying fly in the ointment. It should come as no surprise that an enterprising author might rush into print a book about the recently fallen boss for the recognition and financial promise from a preemptive publication. The usurper was Harold Begbie. He lost no time, and his book, Shackleton, A Memory, was published by early March 1922. Emily promptly received a copy and was incensed over inaccuracies and especially angry that Begbie, a journalist who was acquainted with Sir Ernest, but seemed to consider himself qualified to render an intimate portrait. Parts of the book she declared, quote, "abominable." Surely some events were apocryphal. She vented him a letter to Mill on April 9th, even before her formal invitation to him, and aired in the press that Begbie was, quote, "gravely misinformed." Begbie's publisher responded in the London Times unapologetically. The book was not a biography, they wrote, only the author's impressions, but acknowledging there might be a future official biography. Begbie explained away his book as a pamphlet, quote, "a sketch to show the man as a veritable inspiration in the life of his countrymen," close quote. Mill, in his own copy of the book, applied numerous pencil marginalia and underlinings, noting 50 inaccuracies or misrepresentations in the book's 79 pages. He never cited Begbie or even acknowledged the book's existence. Even so, Begbie's text is appealing. It's even delicious, although often crossing the line into reverential hagiography. And yet, aren't we all just a bit guilty of the same Shackleton hero worship? Regardless of one's opinion of Begbie's book, it is irrefutably the first one published after Sir Ernest's death, and most collectors of Shackletonia consider the book part of the Shackleton canon. But back now to Mill's biography. Mill, upon his death in 1950, bequeathed his Fuller Books, Papers, and Correspondence to the Scott Fuller Research Institute in Cambridge. You can see the oval red rubber stamp indicating his bequest of 1950 on Emily's letter of April 18th. On one of my visits to Spry in the 1990s when I was researching my bibliography, I read with fascination the entire set of letters Emily had written to Mill as they collaborated to produce Mill's biography. I wondered at the time whether the other half of the correspondence existed. It did, and it appeared among items from the Shackleton collection offered at Christie's London a hint over 20 years ago in September 2003. By great luck, I was able to acquire Mill's letters that included many press clippings. I approached Bob Hedlund, then Spry curator, and I think Bob was here somewhere. About a joint effort to publish the correspondence. He agreed pending Zaz Shackleton's approval of the project, which he graciously gave, He forwarded to me an entire copy of Spry's half, and then the work began. Mill's handwriting was easy to read and transcribe. Emily's was anything but. I begged various people, including Zaz, for help, and at the end of the effort, only a few words were left undeciphered. Then there was the matter of footnoting to clarify people, places, and events. The result was Rejoice My Heart, published in 2007. Zaz provided a preface, T.H. Bachman wrote an assessment of Mill, and I took on the editorial responsibilities in book production. Altogether, the correspondence includes 96 letters from Emily and 30 from Mill, as well as extracts from 37 press reviews, plus bibliography and index. The correspondence, which neither of them obviously ever expected would be made public, were a revelation of their personalities and facts about Sir Ernest, the origins of his love of poetry, and frank comments about family and associates found nowhere else. As Rob Stevenson put it, and I know Rob is here somewhere, Emily, quote, up to now seems to have resided in the shadowy background. We've never really known Emily as a person. Reading through this correspondence, we come to sense who she was. No eccentricity or mystique here, but lots of strength, determination, and capability. And one can only marvel at how terrifically polite and patient a man Hugh Robert Mill was. Close quote. The two were formal in their letters. It was always, my dear Dr. Mill, and my dear Lady Shackleton. Mill's letters always carried a certain decorum, while Emily revealed not just relevant facts, but also her personal doings, often chatty ones, and her sensibilities. I was particularly moved by what she wrote on May 22nd, 1922. She was forwarding for Mill's review many letters Ernest had written to her. She wrote, quote, most of them are quite wonderful and very beautiful. They make me feel I was not worthy of such love, and yet it is a precious memory, though it makes me feel so utterly desolate now. Close. Imagine if Mill's biography were created today with emailing and texting. The intricate workings of their collaboration might have been lost unless they had the prescience to save their electronic missives. And I think that's a message and advice for all of us who write today. Emily and Mill's collaboration proved to be heaven-sent. While Mill labored with the synthesis of material and the writing, Emily brought every morsel of information to him from her own records, those of relatives, friends, and acquaintances, and Sir Ernest's expedition staffs, and she reviewed all of his writing. Mill, aware of Emily's stressed financial resources, in the Memorandum of Agreement with Hyman, generously assigned all future book profits to her. As you can see in the crossings out, Emily was made the proprietor. In essence, the biography for Mill was a labor of love and respect for the boss. Once the book was out of their hands and into Hyman's, a mere year after they embarked on this project, Mill wrote to Emily on March 17, 1923, quote, it is very pleasant to be able to look back on so long a stretch of difficult and delicate authorship without the slightest friction in its whole length, and I am sure that there is scarcely a woman alive who could have aided the author of her husband's biography so ably and understandingly as you have done all through. Close quote. Mill's life was published on April 26, 1923 to Universal Press. It was attractively produced and sold well despite the high price of 21 shillings. Janet Stanton Wills, tobacco heiress and Sir Ernest's close friend and supporter, after whom one of the three presented Sir Ernest exactly as he appeared to me, not perfect, but intensely human and entirely lovable, close quote. Mill and Emily each inscribed copies of Mill's life to selected individuals. In this case, the copy Emily inscribed to Edmund Gossey, librarian of the House of Lords. Such copies rarely appear in the marketplace. Presumably, their current owners have jealously swirled them away in their collections. The book was published in Dutch the same year, noting both Mill and Emily as authors. Book reviews in the British presses conferred universal praise. The Daily Telegraph reviewed the book 2 days before its actual publication, stating, quote, "In this vivid, picturesque, just biography written by a friend, Shackleton stands out as the man he was. Dr. Mill has done his work admirably," close quote. In a highly laudatory review in the Northern Echo issued on the day of publication, the anonymous reviewer said, quote, "Dr. Hugh R. Mill's biography of Sir Ernest Shackleton adds another volume to the library of those stories of great men whose deeds have appealed to the imagination of the world. There was much which the explorer himself could not tell. It is now recorded in a book, which gives a fascinating and full portrait of the man and reveals many sides of his character unknown before to the general public. Poet, journalist, secretary of a learned society, lecturer, philanthropist, and above all, a good friend, jovial companion, and possessor of an unbounded sympathy, he overcame difficulties, the existence of which were hidden by his cheerful optimism and known only to his few intimate friends. Many of his greatest acts have passed unrecorded until now, and the full biography will leave him in a higher place in the affections of the people," close quote. The reviewer went on to describe one of those greatest acts, perhaps one of the most extraordinary and beautiful yet private events in all of Antarctic history, one that we all know, one that captured the essence of Sir Ernest, and which was revealed in print only for the first time in Mill's book. Shackleton's polar party was struggling north from the farthest south and starving. On January 31st, 1909, Shackleton slipped his own precious breakfast biscuit, 505 calories of energy, to Wilde, who was afflicted with dysentery and very weak, Shackleton insisting, quote, "Your need is greater than mine," close quote. Wilde wrote in his diary that day, underlining every word, quote, "I do not suppose that anyone else in the world can thoroughly realize how much generosity and sympathy was shown by us. I do, and by God, I shall never forget. Thousands of pounds would not have bought that one biscuit," close quote. As Emily wrote to Mill on October 12, 1922, Wilde personally confirmed to her the biscuit story. She said that he never told Adams and Marshall, and that he was unable to express his feelings about the loss in public, as he could not do so without breaking down. The two men, after the biscuit episode, were forever bonded through to the endurance and the quest, and now in their joint repose at Grytviken. While the biography was highly lauded, a major complaint came forward days before publication from Captain Rupert England, who captained the Nimrod in 1907. England was probably anxious in his first command in difficult ice conditions. Shackleton considered him far too cautious as they explored the front of the Ross ice shelf seeking a landing site. Their differences came to a head in McMurdo Sound at Cape Royds, where offloading the ship was urgent with the advancing season, and the matter of coal apportionment between shore party and ship still had to be resolved. Shackleton was the leader and England's employer, but England was quite critical of England, but it was too late to revise the letterpress. Mill wrote to Emily, quote, "Captain England is much hurt. I must try to soften the passage when it comes to the popular edition," close quote. That implies that there were already discussions with Lyman that they planned in the future a less expensive edition. Mill did that revision successfully, and the new edition was published by Lyman in October 1924. There was a later edition in April 1933, and it was a reprint of the 1924 edition, and Mill, for his part, was very careful to communicate with the publisher not to make the mistake of reissuing the original edition. Later, full life biographies by Marjorie and James Fisher in 1957, Roland Hunford in 1985, Michael Smith in 2014, Rand Fines in 2021, and the in-depth analysis of the Nimrod by Bo Riffenberg in 2004, all elaborated in much greater depth the entire England episode. Hunford and Fines were biased against England, while the others did not take sides. The Fisher's fine biography was only the second one, appearing 34 years after Mill's. The Fishers had access to many of the sources Mill had, but they expounded on them in greater detail and reproduced Sir Ernest's previously unpublished prose and verse. Hunford's biography retains some of the flavor of his earlier, highly controversial double biography, Scott and Amundsen, in 1979, but the book met with far greater approval. Smith took a fresh look, and Fines interfaced his own daring-do experiences on the Antarctic continent. Riffenberg's Nimrod is the definitive work on Shackleton's 1907 to 1909 expedition. The usual fate of a first biography of a famous individual is that new evidence inspires new authors to fresh assessments, rendering earlier ones obsolete. Such a fate does not apply to Mill's life. The author and collaborator knew the subject intimately and had access to essentially all the evidence. Later biographers may have embellished and reassessed, but they have not replaced the original. The Fishers themselves called Mill's biography, quote, "a compendious scholarly volume on which any future writer on Shackleton must depend in great measure, a striking effort to draw together the multifarious threads of a complex character," close quote. And so I must conclude today by applauding Hugh Robert Mill and Emily Shackleton for their work. If the boss could only know, I bet he would have been thrilled with what they did. Thank you.
Okay, we have a few minutes to ask a few questions of Michael before we break for lunch. There must be some questions.
I assume that we are all pre-prandial and ready for lunch.
I'm just curious, last slide you showed a picture of Shackleton on the front cover, but in the suit with his hands in his pockets, it's very kind of informal kind of pose. Does that surprise you? You use him in polar gear or some formal uniform. Any thoughts on why you use that particular photograph? Or
Why that particular pose?
Yeah.
It's a very good question. I think maybe, this is just my own speculation, obviously. Shackleton had a life aside from his expeditions, and he had a particular appearance on his expeditions in his sledging dress and all that. But he looked like this in his private life and in all of his business endeavors. And I suspect that this photograph was taken to represent a broader picture. That's my guess.
yeah. Jonathan?
Is there a case for ink to be reprinted?
It is.
Is there a case for the biography to be reprinted?
For reprinting Bill's biography of Shackleton. It's an interesting question. I think that copies are still readily available, provided you're not too picky on edition and condition and whatnot. But it is a very good point.
Sorry, Kevin here. Michael, thanks very much. Fantastic talk. Can you comment on Mill's original dedication, his proposed dedication at the front of his biography, which brings it, I think, very close to where we are now?
In other words, to whom he dedicated
his original proposal, which, as I understand it, Emily changed to the one that's currently on it.
It's an interesting question. I'm not familiar with the background on that.
Okay, well, if you don't mind that, his original dedication, as I understand it, was to those who loved them from Grithigan to Kilkenny, which is, the span was like Kilkenny, where he was born, just up the road from here. And then the dedication which is there is to my comrades. His dedication, I forget what his current dedication ended up, but as I understand it, because John Kuchecki wrote about this in, I've got the, it was that book, wasn't it? Yeah, so, John Kuchecki wrote about this in his book last year, but it was evidence that he originally had a dedication that brought it very close to where we are.
I do recall that the dedication was sort of a generic, broader-based thing.
Just a very small question, just something in the Telegraph review. It said he was a great Elizabethanist. In terms I'm not familiar with them, I just wonder whether you know whether that was at the time shorthand for the explorers of the Elizabethan age or what that meant.
It probably was. That would be my guess.
Any more questions before we break for lunch? Should I ask Chancellor to me of the book? Okay, we're good to go. Again, Mike, thanks very much. That was fantastic. Thank you very much. Okay, the first one, you see Mike here at half two for Mike Robinson. Lecturers, thanks for encouraging the reception for your lunch at Cranberries.